In 1973, while Hollywood was churning out disaster movies and star vehicles, one low-budget adult film quietly became the most talked about, most critically respected release of the year. It was forged from three unlikely ingredients: heavy doses of French existential philosophy, financing tied to organized crime, and a dusty, abandoned apple-packing warehouse deep in rural Pennsylvania. This is a film that, in today's risk-averse climate, would never make it past the first pitch meeting. Imagine walking into a room in 1972 and saying, "I want to make a hardcore adult feature structured like Jean-Paul Sartre's No Exit, with a title lifted from a 1941 Preston Sturges comedy, shot in a fruit warehouse, starring a 36-year-old Broadway dancer who was hired to cook lunch." That film was The Devil and Miss Jones. It didn't come from Paramount or United Artists. It didn't come from some pretentious European auteur collective. It came from a former hairdresser from Queens named Gerard Damiano, who 12 months earlier had accidentally changed cinema history by directing Deep Throat. Deep Throat made Damiano famous, wealthy, sort of, and the unwilling poster boy for porno chic. But it also left him frustrated. He knew the film was little more than a gimmick with a punchline. He didn't want to be remembered for a one-joke movie. In every interview from that era, Damiano repeated the same conviction. Adult films were boring because they had no story, no characters, no soul. If he ever got a second chance, he was going to prove the genre could be real cinema. That second chance arrived faster than anyone expected. He sat down and reread Sartre's No Exit. Three damned souls locked in a room forever, realizing hell is other people. Damiano kept the architecture, the inescapable room, the emotionless afterlife bureaucracy, the mounting dread, but replaced the intellectual arguments with something far more primal, an insatiable, doomed hunger for connection. Suddenly, it wasn't just an adult film. It was a tragedy wearing the clothes of exploitation. Now comes the part everyone loves to tell. Georgina Spelvin, 36 years old, veteran of Broadway choruses, off-Broadway plays, summer stock, and countless starving artist gigs, was flat broke in 1972. When a friend mentioned a movie shooting upstate that needed a cook and general production helper, she jumped at the steady paycheck. Her official title, catering manager. Her daily job, making coffee, sandwiches, and keeping 20 people fed on a shoestring budget. The lead role of Justine Jones had already been cast with an actress named Sue Flay. Then, 2 days before cameras rolled, Sue's wisdom teeth exploded. Emergency surgery. Gone. Chaos. While the producers scrambled, Damiano asked various crew members to read opposite actors auditioning for smaller roles. Georgina, standing there with a ladle in one hand, read a scene. Damiano froze. He later said her voice had a kind of wounded honesty he'd never heard in the industry. That afternoon, he walked up to her and asked the most famous question in Golden Age lore. "How would you like to be the star instead of the cook?" She laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. Within 48 hours, the woman hired to make tuna sandwiches was carrying the entire emotional weight of the movie. Principal photography took place not in some seedy New York loft, but inside a cavernous former Apple warehouse in Milanville, Pennsylvania. Chosen because it was cheap, private, and far from prying eyes. They built only what they needed: a sterile afterlife waiting room, a claustrophobic stone cell, a few limbo-like voids. Cinematographer João Fernandes, billed as Harry Flex to protect his mainstream career, used stark theatrical lighting, single sources, long shadows, Rembrandt triangles on faces, to turn plywood and plaster into something that looked and felt like a nightmare staged by Ingmar Bergman or early Polanski. The result is genuinely eerie. Even today, stripped of context, many sequences play like experimental theater rather than commercial erotica. And at the center of it all is Georgina Spelvin. What she does is almost impossible to describe without sounding hyperbolic. She acts the hell out of the movie. Not for an adult film, she simply acts. Her Justine Jones is quiet, awkward, painfully lonely, and utterly believable. She makes you forget the genre you're watching. The supporting players are just as fascinating. John Clemens as Abaka, the afterlife clerk, speaks in the soothing monotone of a claims adjuster denying your insurance, chillingly polite, utterly indifferent to human suffering. Harry Reems, still the most famous adult actor on the planet thanks to Deep Throat, plays the teacher with an almost paternal gentleness that somehow never feels forced. Judith Hamilton, Marc Stevens, and the rest of the ensemble function less as individual characters and more as escalating stations of the cross, each encounter stripping away another layer of Justine's defenses until there's nothing left but raw need. Then comes the finale. Damiano himself steps in front of the camera as the silent, nameless figure in the final cell. No brimstone, no devils with pitchforks, just two people trapped together for eternity, one begging for touch, the other forever out of reach. It's one of the coldest, most philosophically brutal endings in 1970s cinema, period. When the film premiered in spring 1973, America was in the strange twilight of porno chic. For roughly 18 months, adult movies played first-run theaters on Main Street, got reviewed by major papers, and sparked endless debates about art versus obscenity. The Devil in Miss Jones landed right in the sweet spot. The New York Times ran a serious review. Time magazine put it on the cover, sort of. Roger Ebert wrote multiple pieces, calling it a small, honest, somber tragedy and praising its craftsmanship. It was entered as evidence in obscenity trials from Memphis to Miami. It grossed an estimated $15 to $20 million domestically, numbers that most legitimate studio films would have killed for, on a budget most directors couldn't use to buy craft services. For one brief, dizzy moment, a 62-minute film shot in a fruit warehouse convinced a chunk of the critical establishment that the adult genre might actually produce art. History, of course, had other plans. The moment passed. Laws tightened. The industry fractured. Sequels were made. None came within light years of the original. But The Devil in Miss Jones remains the great what if of American exploitation cinema. Proof that, under the perfect storm of talent, timing, desperation, and sheer nerve, even the most marginalized corner of filmmaking can produce something haunting, lasting, and undeniably human. Sometimes the most forbidden films end up asking the biggest questions. The Devil in Miss Jones, 1973. A film that asked, can a forbidden genre make serious art?